Welcome to the Cool Tools Show. I'm Mark Frauenfelder, Editor-in-Chief of Cool Tools, a website of tool recommendations written by our readers. You can find us at cool-tools.org. I'm joined by my co-host, Kevin Kelly, founder of Cool Tools. Hey, Kevin.
Hey, it's great to be here.
In each episode of the Cool Tools Show, Kevin and I talk to a guest about some of his or her favorite uncommon and uncommonly good tools they think others should know about.
Before we introduce this week's guest, I want to give a shout out to our Patreon supporters. Patreon is a great way to support everything Cool Tools does, including our newsletters, our podcast, video channels, and our review website. This week, we want to give a shout out to Lawrence Lazaire and David Abel. To become a patron of Cool Tools, visit patreon.com/cooltools. Our guest this week is Spencer Wright. Spencer is the founder of theprepared.org, where he edits a widely read newsletter about engineering, manufacturing, and other meaningful work in the physical world. His career has spanned construction project management, bicycle frame building, consumer electronics, and generative design software. He also co-organizes the New York Hardware Meetup and spends a lot of time trying to get his 4-year-old daughter excited about hanging out in his Brooklyn workshop. Hey, how's it going, Spencer?
Hey, guys. So happy to be here.
It's really a pleasure to have you on, and I'm really looking forward to your picks because I really respect the things that you're doing, and we're looking forward to what you have to share with us.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, so Spencer, let's just get started and have you talk about this retractable extension cord setup.
If you could describe what it is for our benefit of readers who don't see any pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of months ago, I had part of the Prepared's workshop rewired, and we added a bunch of like 2-gang receptacles, outlets, mounted to the ceiling. Now, we're in an old industrial building in Brooklyn, and it has these great high ceilings. They're like 4 meters or 12 feet tall, and the ceiling is all concrete, which is kind of has some downsides but has some upsides. And in this case, we just mounted all of this conduit and these receptacles right to the ceiling, and then hung these overhead cord reels, these retractable extension cords, right next to them. The result is that whenever you want power anywhere in the shop, we laid these things out on a grid. And so you just reach up and grab the closest extension cord from, right above your head and pull it down to you. And so the cord reels themselves, they're about maybe a foot in diameter. They hang from the ceiling very easily. And then they have a 25 or 30 foot extension cord coiled up inside them with a spring retract system inside as well. And yeah, the result is that just you have this easy access to power anywhere in the shop and no extension cords around the ground to trip on.
Okay. And the mechanism kind of works like the way they used to work in vacuum machines, vacuum cleaners, where you pull the cord out, and then when you want it to go back in, you kind of yank it quickly, and it disengages the clutch, and it kind of winds itself back up, and that's the mechanism basically is that are in these.
Yeah, exactly. It's not quite as dramatic as the retract on the like Miele vacuum that I grew up with, but it's totally satisfying, and it's so nice having this thing above your head then.
Right. And presumably they come in different lengths, and you can kind of choose what size length you would want. And the idea is that the cord will kind of hang, maybe 2 or 3 feet or above your head, just high enough to grab it, but not get in your way.
Yep, exactly. And the nice thing, for our shop, because we have such high ceilings, we can maneuver, a piece of plywood or, a piece of machinery around. And, almost everything goes right underneath the cords. It might slap it if it's a really tall piece of plywood. But so they're very much out of your way, but also very much within reach as well.
Sure. What if you didn't have high ceilings? What if you were in a workshop like mine where there's barely an 8-foot ceiling? Would these have a place in the workshop?
Yeah, I think they would. I would put them, in the corner then, right? So in our shop, we have so much space, we can put them right in the middle of the ceiling and they're fine. But even in a smaller shop, something with a, roughly 8-foot ceiling, you could mount them right in the corner, right where the ceiling meets the wall. And you have kind of the same effect, right? Where they're out of the way. You're not, walking into them all the time. And they're easy to reach. And again, your power is all above you, and so whenever you do need an extension cord, you're not tripping over it. If it was a small shop, I would even skip the cord reels and just take the step of wiring receptacles into your ceiling, because it's fantastic, right? Any tool that you have, you can just reach up and plug it right in, and then it has the same radius, right, or around a wall mounted receptacle or a floor mounted receptacle, but you're not kind of tripping over it.
Right. So another thing I kind of detected in current workshop is that people are putting in retractable pneumatic air hoses.
Yep.
The same kind of a thing where you have, and that's a little bit more complicated in terms of just the mechanics of it, because it's high pressure air that has to have a spinning valve. So, but that also for the same kind of reason, where you want to have pneumatic within reach, and so they have these retractable reels, and they drop down from the ceiling. Have you gone that route yet?
We haven't in our shop yet, but I think that you're highlighting something that's actually really useful and is kind of a design feature of industrial buildings across the board, which is that you have this ceiling space and you put all of your utilities there, right? So, we do the same thing with Cat5 cable, right? We have, a bunch of equipment that's networked around our workshop. And by installing either cable trays or routing eyes around the shop, you can run your network cable, out of the way on the wall, up, 8 or 10 feet or something like that. And it's very similar to the way you're talking about the pneumatic system, where all of these services are accessible. You can a short 6-foot ladder, you can reach up and service them, but they're not in your way when you're working around the shop.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So this one doesn't have a price.
I think they're about $100 or so. Okay. I've gotten them from both Amazon and McMaster-Carr, and I've used this Alert stamping brand, which seems totally fine.
Okay, great. It's a good recommendation. Thanks. So what's next on your list?
So the next thing is Parts Box, which is very different. Are you guys aware of Parts Box?
No. Is it like Sortimo? Is it like organizer? I'm not sure. I hear parts and box, but I don't know what the combination
right, exactly. So Parts Box is like a digital way of managing all of the inventory of everything you keep in your shop. Basically, when you get like a small parts cabinet, that have either a bunch of little drawers or one large drawer with a bunch of subcompartments, and usually they give you a booklet or a tape of these little stickers or cards that you are supposed to write the part number on or the specifications and then stick it to that drawer or something like that. Parts Box is a digital replacement for all of that. So it's a website, and you create your own catalog of parts and then tell Parts Box where each part is stored, how many you have there, what they cost, so on and so forth. So you go to your physical part cabinet and you just name every single compartment in it. And they have Parts Box has easy ways to do this, where you just kind of create a grid and you say, you have columns and rows. And so this is, bin A4 or whatever it is. And then you add whatever parts that you have in your inventory into Parts Box and assign them to that storage location. Now, Parts Box is mostly built for electronics. And so I think they use like the Octopart API or something like that, where if you give it a DigiKey number or a manufacturer number, it'll look up, what resistor that is, or so on and so forth. I mostly use it for mechanical parts, for nuts and bolts and strings and whatever. So I mostly use McMaster-Carr part numbers. I'd say maybe 90% is McMaster-Carr, and then 5% is Amazon, and the rest is some mix of other suppliers or things I've designed myself. And I name all my parts, that my master car number or whatever it is, and then add enough detail so that PartsBox's search system can easily find what I might be looking for. So for instance, I use mostly metric fasteners. And, if I'm working on a project, I need an M5 socket head cap screw. I'll go to PartsBox. I won't look at my physical parts storage at all. I go to PartsBox first. I search M5 socket or something like that. And up come the, 20 different parts that meet that description. And if I click on them, then it tells me what storage location to go to look for them. The great part about this is that you can use stochastic storage systems, right? So you're not building any hierarchy into your physical storage locations where, all of the M5 bolts are in one area and all the 1/4 inch bolts are in another area. With this, they're all stored randomly, which is really nice because when you get an order of bolts or screws or capacitors, wherever it is, you just find an open bin and put them there, and then tell PartsBox about it.
Yeah. That's how.
And you just tell PartsBox which bin. You do a description of
Right.
the bin that it's in.
Right.
They all have, they have names like just it's a nondescript name. It's bin 30, whatever it is, right? But then, in your workshop, you have that name, printed on each bin or just written on it with a Sharpie is what I do.
So the one thing that I always fail or in the system is when I remove the bolts from that one. It's like, how does that happen automatically? Because that's where it breaks down is, okay, oh my gosh, I forgot to tell that I removed 12 bolts from here and they're not there anymore.
Do you scan it or?
Yeah, they have. So PartsBox has built-in systems for this. I honestly, most of the time I'm buying screws in a package of 50 or 100 or something like that. And so keeping track of that isn't incredibly important to me, right? I'll use 10 for a project, and then it doesn't really matter whether there are 40 or 35 of them left in the bin. What matters is when when it's below zero, right? And because I'm mostly using MasterCard, but even if you're using, if you're using Amazon and you have Prime Delivery, or if you're using DigiKey or whatever, those fulfillment systems are just so fast that it's easy for me to just forget about how many are in each storage location for the vast majority of my parts, right? And then I only reorder when I get to when I happen to look there and realize that I'm low, because I have same day MasterCard delivery here where I am, right? It's almost faster than ordering on Seamless.
You have same day. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, that's
which is dangerous, honestly, right?
Okay, that's the future there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, why would you worry then?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, so anyway, this is software. This is like, I have a library cataloging system that's very kind of similar to the same thing. So this is software for organizing and tracking and cataloging basically your small parts, your parts. And it seems particularly suited if you have any kind of production rather than just, say, a tinkerer's workshop.
I mostly use it kind of for, what I'm doing isn't really product development per se, but it's, it's projects, right? And what happens oftentimes is, you buy a couple of screws for a project and then they sit there and they're either in a cardboard box, which disintegrates over time, or they're in a bag, which is just kind of annoying to store. And for me, knowing that I have some kind of minimum quantity of whatever screw size it is so useful, right? And having them all organized and searchable is just it's really incredible.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, great. That's a good suggestion. So that's PartsBox. Tell us about Workbenches.
Yeah, so I actually just finished this project. I built a Poc Workbench, and the Poc Workbench Design. It's something that's distributed by this guy Ron Poc, who is a YouTube and internet personality. He's a woodworker who has created this design and sells plans for it. And the idea is that you make it yourself, right? And it's designed for people who are doing.
Wait, could you describe
Yeah,
this? The give us a picture of what it looks like.
yeah. So it's a woodworking workbench that's made primarily of plywood, and the workbench top, instead of being a solid like a butcher block or something like that, it's a plywood box that uses what's called a torsion box system. And so the workbench top, in my case, is 200 millimeters tall, and it has a top surface and a bottom surface, and then some ribs and sides to hold them together. And the result is that you have this great built-in storage area in your workbench top. You have kind of a shelf, right, where you can keep commonly used tools. And then the standard Poc workbench uses plywood sawhorses for the base. I actually use this industrial framing system called FlexPipe, which is kind of like a steel pipe system to build this substructure. But then the idea with the workbench is that you use it to mount both your table saw and a router table as well. And it becomes kind of the central workstation for your entire wood shop, right? It's geared mostly towards folks who are making things out of plywood.
Mm. And does the top surface out of plywood? I see one version where there are a grid of holes put in, presumably for clamping. Is that the standard default, or is that just an option?
That's kind of the key to it. So the thing I really like about the Poc workbench is it's part of this ecosystem within woodworking that is really interesting right now. A lot of it revolves around Festool tools, which they have this very German design in which everything is a system and it's all very modular. And the grid of holes, so typically it's a 20 millimeter hole every 96 millimeters in an X and Y grid, right? So you have it's roughly a 3/4 inch hole every 4 inches. And the result is, you can clamp anywhere on the surface and you can just hold things down super quickly. In addition, because those holes are laid out in a square grid, you can use what are called bench dogs, which is basically just like a little metal cylinder. You put a bench dog in one of these holes, and then you can align your plywood right to that and make cuts directly on the workbench. And there are all these little kind of aspects of this system that allow you to work in a very modular way and create, especially kind of basic plywood furniture very quickly.
And the table is mostly tables that people make themselves rather than kind of like you purchase, although probably you could purchase them, but they're kind of plans for people to. I'm assuming you're using like 3/4 inch Baltic plywood or some sort
Exactly.
to make these things. And so then you would make your own workbench, your own Poc style workbench. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. So there are certainly aspects of the system that you can purchase, and in particular, there's kind of a Festool, kind of sized down Festool equivalent, which also has this grid of holes which you can purchase, of course. But I think that one of the cool things about this, the kind of woodworking and plywood craft community right now, is that it's a tool that uses the same skills that you'll then use to use the tool, if that makes any sense, right? So any kind of plywood furniture that you're going to make will use the same track saws and routers and table saws and so on and so forth that you would use to make this workbench. And it has this, I don't know, it has this kind of like circularity to it, to me, or something like that, where you're kind of using the skills that you kind of naturally have in order to make the tool that you will then allow you to kind of produce some product or just kind of hobby stuff or whatever it is.
Are you using a ShopBot router?
No, so we do have an X-Carve Pro in the prepared shop, but we have like half dozen routers in here. The Workbench does have a router table in it, and then I have one of the Festool routers and also a Shaper Origin as well. The 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 reason for the not using the Xcarve so much is mostly just the size limitations, right? It's a little bit more setup, and also it's a relatively small build area, and being able to kind of work on an arbitrary large thing is really nice.
Okay, so the tool here is this these are plans that we're going to link to, so that if you want to make one of these, here are a set of plans that you can get, produced by the Poc fellow.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
I think my main complaint with it is that, and this is another kind of this is a weird aspect of the kind of woodworking community now, is that none of it's modeled in 3D, right? I mean, I think that this stuff comes from kind of a SketchUp a modeling environment or something like that, and then it's just sold as a PDF. I then took that PDF. Oh, go ahead.
See. What you would like to get is actually 3D files, like in a Fusion 360. Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, folks have shared Fusion 360 models of their Poc setups. I bought the plans and then adapted somebody else's Fusion 360 model as well. And, having this in Fusion, I mean, to me, modeling something in 3D is just such a great way to start a project. And then it allows you to use kind of any kind of CNC tools to make it. In my case, I did use the Shaper Origin for quite a few features on it.
Right. So that was been one of sort of my epiphanies this year. I finally got a 3D printer. I have a Cricut, and then I'm doing other things, but I figured out that the entire what's the word I want, mastery of all the stuff is in basically mastering 3D software.
Yeah.
That until I could become a lot more competent in producing and managing 3D software, having the tools was really kind of extraneous. It wasn't really where the work was. It was all right in modeling, and I find the learning curve still pretty steep. I'm where each time I go into Photoshop, I have to basically relearn everything.
Me too.
I forgot it since I used it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and I've already forgotten that little shortcut, which makes all the difference. And so, learning 360 and SketchUp even is like it's a big thing. Did you start off modeling and then move into the tools, or were you in tools and then figured that you had to learn the modeling?
Kind of a combination. The first parts that I had made from a 3D model were SketchUp designs, actually, which was kind of a terrible way of documenting my ideas in 3D, because I was going for machined and dimensioned parts, right? SketchUp is a fantastic piece of software, and you can make some really cool stuff with it. It's not, however, great at creating. I mean, you can't make a drawing and export that to or either a 3D file or a drawing and get it made. I spent a number of years after that then kind of working mostly in 2D, and then just ended up at a company where there was a seat of Autodesk Inventor, which is kind of their SolidWorks competitor. And I just kind of learned out of necessity, honestly, Kevin. Fusion is definitely weird in a couple of ways if you're coming from either a SolidWorks or Inventor background. And I can totally imagine how it's weird coming from SketchUp or just from 2D as well. Once you have it, though, it's just a superpower, right? I mean, you can visualize things so much better, and like you're saying, kind of the ability to then use tools like 3D printers and laser cutters and so on and so forth is really incredibly enabling.
Right. Yeah. So we like to hear your fourth cool tool. Tell us about this one.
Yeah. So my last pick is a Johnson bar. Um, a Johnson bar is kind of like a cross between a crowbar and a hand truck. It's this big piece of steel or wood, usually about 6 feet long. And at one end there's a handle, and the other end there are two little wheels and a little lip, kind of like a pry lip that you can use to lift really heavy things off the ground. They're they're used mostly to move heavy machinery, and they can lift up to like 5,000 pounds pretty easily just with one person. Now they only lift them a couple of inches, but they're it's kind of magical, right? It's kind of like an Egyptian way of moving heavy things around, where you have this really 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 long lever, and are able to scoot something that's very heavy a very small distance.
And then presumably you could then wedge something in and maybe get a jack in there, and then you can then get it high enough to transport or something. But this is the initial getting it high enough to get something else under it.
Yeah, exactly. And the beauty of owning a Johnson bar is that they enable you to take unloved heavy equipment off other people's hands, right? I mean, there are a lot of milling machines and lathes out there that someone bought decades ago, and they've been sitting on a garage floor ever since, and they decline in value, partly because they're just difficult to move, right? Now, yeah. Now you're not going to use a Johnson bar to to move something down the street, let alone to a different city or something like that. But you can use it to just get a heavy item up onto a dolly, or a hand truck, or a pallet jack or something like that. And it really is just like an incredible superpower to be able to lift this heavy thing just a couple of inches and then actually move it, right?
Right. That's really cool. I wonder if you could rent them. Can you rent them from Home Depot?
I don't know. I wouldn't think so, but it's totally possible. I think of them as being a tool that like rigging companies use a lot, right? Someone whose job it is to move heavy machinery around. But it's possible the Home Depot would have them.
Do you need two of them to be useful?
If you have two of them, then you can get a friend and move things more quickly for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've only ever owned one of them, and honestly, this is one of those tools where using it slowly can make you a lot safer, right? Because you are
Mm-hmm.
talking about something that if it tips over, it could kill you, right? Not the Johnson bar, but the lathe that you're moving or whatever it is.
So these things are pretty heavy duty. They're probably going to last a lifetime. There's very few moving parts. They're about $200.
Yep.
One of the underappreciated or lesser known tools that I have on my short list of things that people should really consider is a lightweight dolly, which I use all the time. And I don't know. I mean, it's just like, and having one that I can lend out to people who are moving things. Hey, here's my dolly, throw it in the back. And it's remarkable how useful it is, even for, like a regular homeowner, just for moving, bags of peat moss, for moving whatever it is. It's really, and this is sort of in that same vein of, once you have one, you probably wind up using it a lot more than you would ever guess.
Right. And it like a dolly, it prevents you, owning one prevents you from doing something dumb and hurting yourself,
Yeah,
right?
right.
There's no need to try and lift heavy things without leverage. So
Right, exactly. Or wheels.
yes.
So, well, this is really, really fantastic. Great things. Tell us a little bit more about the Prepared.
Yeah, so the Prepared is it's a newsletter I run. It's a weekly newsletter that kind of is about these types of things, right? I word it as meaningful work in the physical world because it's partly about manufacturing, partly about logistics, partly about construction, kind of the areas of my career that I've worked in. And it's kind of divided up into some industry news, some just like engineering factoids, and kind of the random kind of interview or plenty of manufacturing videos as well.
And manufacturing, so that's a very, very broad term. Um, are you kind of catered a little bit more towards the smaller shop, short runs, or are you as enamored of the big industrial factories producing, cold rolled conduit, whatever? I mean,
Yeah.
give me a little bit more sense of what you're kind of focusing on.
Yeah, well, my belief is fundamentally that being a generalist helps you make good decisions, right? And so, and in addition, it's just personally enriching to be aware of things kind of in the adjacent possible, right? So, um, some of my favorite conversations with engineers have been, folks who work in industries that I would never consider working in, and the prepared is kind of meant to treat all those things with, at minimum curiosity and ideally with some degree of respect, right? And so, if there are plenty of really interesting engineering topics happening in, oil and gas and aviation and also in kind of single family home construction, right? And my belief is that, you don't have to agree with them, you don't have to study them at much length, but being aware of them and at least considering what their implications are can make you better at the things that you do, whether or not you work in kind of the physical engineering world.
Okay. And the newsletter, how big is it? How often does it come out? What does it cost?
Totally free. I mean, my view of the newsletter business is that if you're not giving it away, it's really, really hard to grow, right? It's a weekly newsletter, goes out to about 10,000 people, and typically is about 5 minutes to read, something like that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Great. So we'll have a link there to theprepared.org. And are you writing most of it yourself, or do you take contributors?
Yeah, so for about 5 years, I wrote it myself every single week, and then about 2 years ago, that I backed off considerably, and then as of 2020, 50% of it is written by somebody other than myself, and I think that is this is like an unvarnished good thing, right? I mean, you know, I love kind of writing this and researching things, but again, one of the benefits is getting a broad a perspective on kind of the physical world and engineering within it. And so I have guest editors who work kind of all around manufacturing and physical engineering, and they bring perspectives that I just wouldn't be able to relate otherwise.
Okay. Well, thank you for putting it out and making it available, and particularly for free, and for your great tool picks. And I love your philosophy too of trying to open up some of these kind of tools that are maybe known in the professional, but should be a little bit more widely known, like the Johnson bar. Great pick.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All the tools. I mean, this was great. I had not really heard of any of these before. The parts box, workbench, that kind of cord reel thing was only vaguely familiar to me. So thanks so much, Spencer. This was really fascinating.
Yeah, I consider that a win.
Hey everybody, it's your host Mark, and I wanted to thank you for listening to the Cool Tools Show. And I also wanted to let you know that we've got a lot more going on at Cool Tools than just this podcast. We also have the Cool Tools website, which has a new tool review every day, and you can get there by going to cool-tools.org. We also have 4 different newsletters that you can subscribe to, and you can subscribe to those from the Cool Tools page. We have this podcast that you're listening to right now. We also have a YouTube channel where we review tools. Check that YouTube channel out by going to youtube.com/cooltools. And one of the things I'd like to ask you is, if you're really enjoying everything that we are producing, go to our Patreon page and support us there. You can sign up and give us as little as $1 a month, and that would mean a lot to us. The money that we get from Patreon goes towards a lot of things. We transcribe our podcast interviews so that you can read them online. We pay for editing of our podcasts and for our videos. We pay our contributors. We have video production costs. We have equipment costs. We have hosting costs. And the money you give us through Patreon also goes to support Cool Tools Lab. Anything you give is a huge help. And one of the things that we do is if you are a contributor to Patreon, we'll give you a shout out on air. And so I have a few people here to thank this week. Mark Lyanaj, Micah Gates, Monty Zukowski, Patrick James McNally, Robert Cohen, Scott, Spence Lloyd, Steve Avery, Steve Golden, Steve Levine, Tom Hess, William Phillips, Aaron Nipper, Durab Patel, Glenn Mercer, Jay Walker, Jeff Bonner, Ryan Jarrell, Pat Daly, Patrick Kennedy, Troy Wallet, Mike Camerate, Nicole Harkin, Tim Youssef, Scott Reed. Thanks all of you for supporting Cool Tools. And if you would like to have a shout out, go over to the Patreon page and sign up. And thanks for listening to the Cool Tools podcast. We'll see you next week.